The school year is back in full swing, and Janae, that can only mean one thing.
College football is back, baby, which means our Red Zone to End Zone team will continue to work hard to provide you the latest college football news and updates throughout the season. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janae Muchmore.
And I'm Brandon Williams. We are geared up for another exciting season, but before we start talking about the team talent, I think Janae has some predictions.
Don't get too excited. One of the things I love about college football is how unpredictable it is. And let me just start by saying week 1 will be one to remember. You have Alabama and FSU squaring off in Atlanta in what many believe could be the prelude to this year's championship.
A popular opinion is these two teams will see each other in a championship game, but I won't say these are the two teams that I have going to a championship game. I need at least 6 weeks to say who will go.
I won't comment on the championship just yet, but here's an interesting stat for you. Brandon, do you know who holds the longest opening game win streak?
The Florida Gators.
The Florida Gators. And they are playing the Michigan Wolverines in Texas, who destroyed them during the 2016 Citrus Bowl by 41-7. They just might put an end to that streak, but I do like how Mac is starting to step things up a bit in the season opener.
Well, I think the more important question is, do you know what colors you'll be wearing at the end of the season when you lose our College Pick'em Challenge?
Orange and blue, because I'm not going to lose.
I think you mean garnet and gold.
The season hasn't even started, and the trash talking has already begun. Brandon is referring to an annual bet we make, and you can be a part of it too. Just sign up for our ESPN College Pick'em Challenge.
You can download the ESPN Fantasy app and register for Red Zone and End Zone group within the College Pick'em Challenge. Every week, you'll be assigned to pick the winner of 10 games they provide. You get a point for every correct answer, and if you are the victor at the end of the season, we will give you $30 cash.
As for Brandon, whoever loses will be forced to go out into the Plaza of the Americas sporting some hideous Seminole attire, where the loser will be harassed by fellow students. But if you need some help making those picks, we've got you covered with our weekly college football previews every Friday evening. But for now, we're about to give you a preview of the top 20 going into the 2017 season.
And here's a quick piece of advice. Steer clear of Janae's picks. Oklahoma comes into the season after a pretty easily earned victory in the Sugar Bowl, overpowering an 8-4 Auburn team. They returned 9 starters to an offense that averaged nearly 44 points per game last season.
Really isn't saying too much, Brandon. The average Big 12 team alone allowed on average 30 points per game last year.
Not only that, but when playing against top 25 opponents outside of their conference, their offense went down to average 27 points a game rather than 44 points before.
Well, that's last year's average, and they have a chance to prove they can play with everyone. What has become synonymous with the Oklahoma Sooners will return: Baker Mayfield for his senior season.
Mayfield has proven himself as an elite college quarterback, as he has been named to the All-American second team twice and will look to improve on that. He also almost threw for 4,000 yards and had 40 passing touchdowns.
Unfortunately, a quarterback can only be as good as his wide receivers, as 3 of the top 4 depart from the team. They returned Mark Andrews, the 3rd leading wide receiver, but when Dede Westbrook, a player who was drafted in the 4th round, nearly quadrupled your receiving yards, it becomes a disparity. That being said, Mayfield will have to find some new favorite targets this season.
Well, Oklahoma may see a decline in the run game as their duo of 1,000-yard rushers depart from Norman, leaving behind Rodney Anderson and Abdul Adams to try to pick up the slack. This will be a chink in Oklahoma's armor.
Though, what could be their saving grace is they bring back one of the best offensive lines, including a player who turned down the NFL. It's an experienced group, and if they were able to create holes, they can create yards.
Oklahoma's defense is returning 7 starters and will look to improve on a mark of allowing 28.8 points per game.
Oklahoma's defensive line is a little depleted from last year as they lose second Big 12 team Jordan Wade. Without him, the defensive line had trouble producing many sacks, and they will need to hope someone else can take his place.
The big part about Oklahoma's defense will be their ability to stop the pass. Their secondary will be one of the top in the nation and will help them with some of the pass-heavy offenses in the conference. They return first-team Big 12's cornerback Jordan Thomas and third-team safety Stephen Parker.
Oklahoma has come close in recent years, but they keep falling short. I think now they might actually have a chance to shine, despite some of the obstacles they will face, like Ohio State. This could be a pretty good year for them. What do you think, Brandon?
I believe that Oklahoma will impress, but they will fail to Ohio State, and depending upon that result, the playoff committee may or may not allow them into the playoffs, all depending on margin of victory. The Cowboys make their way into the AP poll, reaching their highest rank since 2011. Riding in from a dismantle of Colorado and the Alamo Bowl 38-8, they are eager to prove they are the premier team in Oklahoma.
They will return their explosive offense as Mason Rudolph turned down the NFL to come back to Stillwater. With a 14-1 odds of winning the Heisman, he hopes to become the first one from Oklahoma State since Barry Sanders back in 1988.
They returned their leading rusher from last year, Justice Hill, with over 1,100 yards from the season. He will be their main target, but the Cowboys lose power running backs who could rush at the goal line.
Well, they return a huge portion of their receiving core, returning 3 of the top 4. This includes James Washington, who also turned down the NFL, for an opportunity to play during the senior season.
I like to see people who come back to their senior season, but there is a risk involved, and hopefully neither get injured from their decision.
Well, the Cowboys may have trouble on their defense, as they only returned 5 starters from a squad who allowed over 26.5 points per game, though they have been decreasing the points allowed since the 2014 season.
The defensive line last year posted rather unimpressive numbers, with the only bright side first-team Big 12 player Vincent Taylor. They returned 6 of their top 8 backs, but will they be able to fill in their positions?
Their linebacker core only returns 1 of their starters, but they had the foresight to add the NJCAA Defensive Player of the Year, Patrick Macon. This will help them recover from their loss, and who knows, he may become a star on the team.
Their defensive backs suffered some losses, losing 4 of their top 8 guys, though it isn't that bad as they returned Trey Flowers. But this is by far the weakest unit on the team, and will put them in a disadvantage to those who have an air attack.
Well, as I like to stress here, defense does win games, and I just don't think the defense is going to be that effective against some of the top passing offenses they run. So therefore, I don't see them advancing too far this season.
I think that they are a completely capable team, but will not find a way on top of their conference. Their secondary is weak, and that can become a huge problem for a conference that likes to sport high-powered offenses.
Kansas State comes into the season after beating Texas A&M in the Texas Bowl to conclude a 9-4 campaign. Led by Bill Snyder for the 26th year, they are ready to roll their first conference championship since 2012.
They do have the experience to do it, but do they have the talent as they return 8 starters on the offensive side of the ball? They returned their dual-threat quarterback, Jesse Ertz, this season, who will hope to do better or duplicate what Colin Klein did his second year, going 11-2.
Well, his arm isn't the most accurate by any measure, as he threw for a completion rate of 57.6%. That's why his ability to run the ball makes him a valuable asset, as he led the team rushing last season, gaining over 1,000 yards for 12 touchdowns. It's fair to say he was the root of the entire offense.
Though we can't just only cover the quarterback, that's lazy journalism. They do return 2 of their top 4 rushers. They returned Justin Silman and Alex Barnes, who you combine their talents together, they averaged 6.38 yards per carry. They also had 9 touchdowns total between the two. So if things get rough for the quarterback, they can rely on them.
Their defensive line will be talented and full of experience as they return 3 of their top 4 members. This is going to help them big time as they disrupt the offensive line and open up plays for the linebackers to make. This will be a huge key as they bring in some really unexperienced players who are not even in the top 10 for their team's tacklers. This is where the biggest question lies, and what will determine how they fare this season defensively.
Well, they lose experience with their linebackers, but have one of the most experienced groups of defensive backs they have had in years. They will look for their junior class to step up, and if they don't succeed this year, they are bound to be successful next year if they guys decide to stay.
And the only team represented by the American Conference is South Florida. And I think they may be the team that comes out and shocks everyone this season. They finished 11-2 last season, and we'll see the return of most of their offense, losing just Maryland Mack in the backfield. No worries there, though. Quentin Flowers might just be able to cover for Mack's absence. Built like a running back, Flowers makes an effective dual-threat quarterback, and under his lead, the South Florida offense finished last season as the 11th offense overall with almost 3,000 passing yards.
But better than that, they were 4th in scoring and 5th in rushing. Unfortunately, they will also be without their number 1 receiver, Rodney Adams, who has 822 yards last season.
But the best thing about Flowers is that he pushes everyone around him to be better. So if the receivers can step up to the challenge, then the Bulls offense should fare pretty well. Not to mention they have a fairly easy schedule and will probably finish the regular season with an 11-1 record.
That's ambitious. And what makes you think Quentin is capable of filling Mac's place?
Well, first off, Mac rushed for nearly 1,200 yards last season, but guess how many yards Flowers had?
How many?
More than 1,500 yards, on top of throwing double that. I'm not worried at all about the Bulls' offensive capabilities despite the absence of Marlon Mack.
They only have a mediocre talent to replace Mac, though including the return of D'Ernest Johnson, who only had 500 yards last season, and Darius Tice, who is returning from an ankle injury.
After last year's loss to Temple, they fell short of making the American Athletic Conference championship game. Now it's time for them to redeem themselves.
On the flip side, the defense has quite some improvements to make. They gave up 482 yards a game and was often beat during the aerial attacks.
The defense is relatively young this year, but they have some veterans that will show them the ropes. Most importantly, they need to quit giving up first downs. After allowing 326 first downs last season, they ranked 4th overall for the most first downs given.
I really can't see them getting far based off of who they are playing this season. You can't make the playoffs if you don't play anyone. Their best hope is to finish as the number 1 team in the group of 5 in the playoff standings to secure a bid to a big bowl game. Or hope their conference can pull off some of the biggest upsets in recent history to boost their resume. And I expect them to go perfect or drop a game along the way. Well, that concludes our show for the AP Top 20.
Don't forget to tune in next week. We'll be covering your Week 1 college football preview featuring the best games of the week. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at BJ_RedZone, where we'll have all the updates and game coverage. Have a good night.